Hi everyone, my name is Klaudia Czerwińska and I would like to warmly welcome you from the headquarters of Indie Games Poland Foundation in Warsaw. Unfortunately, due to the global pandemic, we won't be able to see each other in person during PAX convention held in Seattle, nor the EGX in London. However, I would like to use this occasion to share with you some of the stories of the Polish game developers and some of the most iconic titles which you might already know, but you don't necessarily have to know the country of its origin. Therefore, stay with us and listen close because we have some really interesting stories to tell you. So, everyone, it is my great pleasure to welcome Pavo Schreiber from 11 Beat Studios, and I guess it's a studio that doesn't need an introduction. But just in case you were wondering, those are the creators of titles such as Frostpunk and This War of Mine. Pavo, thanks for joining me today.
Hello.
So, just to start off, what do you think is our superpower as game creators? What makes us so special here in Poland that some of the games and more titles are actually more and more successful?
There are surely few factors that could contribute to that. If you think about the history, game development here dates back even to the 80s. Despite the communism being all around us back then, we already had first studios trying to build up first projects. So when the communism collapsed in early 90s, first professional game dev studios were popping up here and there, including Metropolis Software that I had the pleasure to work at. And then if you think about quality of education of programmers, it's pretty high, maybe even very high. So we have a background, but if you think on a, let's say, metaphysical level, if I can put it that way, that would be the kind of national treat to prove that impossible can be possible. So we like to overcome obstacles that at first glance seem to be impossible to overcome, but then it's like, we like to prove that everything is possible, and that's this, Polish slash Slavic way of, if anybody says you can't do it, we're like, oh yes, I can.
It's basically like
So
hold my beer and let me do it. I'll show you.
yeah, this is it, because games are virtual worlds, and in those virtual worlds there are no limits. So as far as your imagination goes, you can build it up, all those universes in virtual 3D worlds, and we're doing it. So if you have any idea, brave idea for a game with super new mechanics like SUPERHOT guys did, so the time moves only when you move, they are just doing it, and this is national treat. So we like to cross borders and push everything further. And in such a meaning, we have a lot of teams having really innovative approach to design, to creating gameplay mechanics. And this is our advantage. So we have studios really focused on creating innovative games, and even if you go back a little, we didn't have big budgets. Maybe now we do because the scene is already big and grown up, so to speak. But in the 90s or early 2000s, we didn't have big budgets. So being innovative and brave on the idea level was the very first advantage, and we were creating in this spirit, and the spirit stayed, right? So we couldn't compete with quality production because of the lower budgets. So we could compete with innovation, and we did that. And this spirit goes on, organically building bigger and bigger game development scene in Poland, but still a lot of what we do is about innovation.
So maybe let's jump into the notion of this war of mine, because the first time it was actually premiering, it shook people. Because just as you mentioned, it was a completely different angle to war from what we know in the world of gaming. And in Poland, no less, it ended up on the list of recommended required reading for kids attending schools, which is a big deal. This is the first time this is happening with a game. So I wonder, as a creator, what do you think do you think it's important for people of all ages to play this game, to get a certain outlook on the situation and to understand what war is really about? Because the games that we usually play that relate to war, we're usually the ones doing the combat. Here, we're just civilians, just as we are in real life.
This game is rated PEGI 18, so it's obviously not for everyone because it's for adults. So I can't recommend it to teenagers younger than 18 simply because the rating is 18. But above that, I would say yes, but not for everyone. We're not making a game for everyone. There's a saying in industry that if you make a game for everyone, you end up making a game for no one. Because you should know your audience. So we wanted to deliver a game for people who require from games something more than just pure entertainment, and people who look at games in a similar way they look at movies. So capable of covering every topic, be it suffering of civilians, like in the case of this war of mine. But there's plenty more, like Dead Dragon Cancer, about suffering from illness and about suffering of parents whose child is sick. So a game, if approaching the topic properly, can talk about pretty much everything. Of course, there has to be, the harder the topic, the more respect it requires, but I think it's doable. So our game was made for people who like to experience more. I mean, not just fun, like playing an arcade game, but more. And our focus was to deliver an experience that opens up your mind for some topic. And in this case, it was to show that sometimes the physical cost of surviving war is nothing comparing to the emotional cost people pay. That sometimes they are broken, sometimes they lose dignity and everything that's easy to keep when you live in peace, but horribly costful on a metaphysical level when you live in war. So in the end, we were thinking about this group. So I would say, yeah, maybe this could be a game for everyone. But if you are too sensitive, or maybe if you look in games only for pure entertainment, this War of Mine is not for you. So I would rather say it's a game for people who'd like to think about something. In this case, about how war is horrible. And especially games, like I said, have trivialized the topic of war. War has been presented from the perspective of super soldiers running and shooting dozens of bullets and winning a battle by themselves, which is not true, because the real war is a festival of suffering and horrible things.
And the decision making.
Yeah, that it's a kind of reworked quote by, I think, Naukowska, the Polish writer who wrote many books about Second World War. Anyway, so that was our intention. However, because you mentioned the school reading, that's something we're really proud of and happy, and I think that was a milestone step not only for 11-bit but mostly for the entire industry. A milestone that showed that a game can be recognized as a recommended school reading on a national level by administration. So this is something really important because it puts games on the same shelf as books or important movies. So this is amazing, and now I believe it could be a game for 18-year-olds and older students because it can open up your mind towards a subject of war and people living in war. And the biggest difference is because school readings are books, and here we have a game. So the traditional question the teacher asks students, what the author had in mind, turns into what you had in mind when you played the game, because you are telling your own
It makes
story.
you think for yourself and reflect on the things that you see in the game.
Yeah, you tell the story. So you make good or bad deeds, and you are responsible for those. So you can ask yourself, okay, why did I do this or that? And then discuss this with your fellow students in class. So this is something amazing. However, keep in mind, this is a trial program, I would say. So I am now working with Ministry of Education in Poland to create it a formal program. It will take time, but we have some ideas how to make it and hope it can be finished sooner than later.
So you're on your way. Fingers crossed for that project. Pavo, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thanks a lot.
And so, everyone, my next guest is Pavo Schreiber, a journalist and a university lecturer at the Kazimierz Wielki University in Bydgoszcz. Pavo, it's lovely
Hi.
to have you here. How are you? All good?
Yeah, the school year started, and my younger kid just went to the kindergarten, and my older kid went to the first grade. So I'm doing as well as I can in these circumstances, yeah.
Well, given that we've stayed at home for a bunch of months, I guess it's good that the kids may finally see their friends.
Definitely.
So let's jump into the history of Polish gaming, because I am sure that not all of the people, all of the gamers who internationally play our Polish games know what the actual history is. So how was it possible for Poland to create such a technological but also artistic quality in short time?
I think it had to do, at least in the beginnings, it had to do with the scarcity of everything. When you have limitations, you are more determined to work hard. And when you look at Poland in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, when computers start to enter the country, most people, of course, have never seen a computer. Many people would love to see a computer, but they don't know where they can see it. And those who have access to the computer very often don't have this access permanently. So we would have people writing computer programs in their copybooks and then going to their friend's home or to the local computer club to type them in and then see all the bugs. These kind of heroic stories concern, for example, Adrian Chmielarz, one of the major Polish designers. He has such memories of writing his programs without a computer at first. So this was one thing that was very stimulating. The fact that we didn't have enough of these computers, that we were very hungry for computers. It was not like in the States where you went to school and you basically had an Apple II at your disposal and you could play games, you could learn programming.
And we had certain limitations that were also
Yes.
imposed on us from the outside.
Of course, yes. Because of the Cold War, it was forbidden to import most computers into Poland because they could be used for some sinister purposes. They sometimes were used for dangerous purposes, you could say, subversive purposes. There was a very interesting story about the Polish anti-communist opposition broadcasting a special TV signal disrupting the television news at some point with a political slogan. Those were people from the Solidarity movement. So yeah, you could say there was some kind of political danger connected to computers. And it was, as I said, only in the mid-1980s that you could start to get computers freely in Poland. You could buy the 8-bit Atari legally. You could go through some hoops to get the Amstrad CPC, for instance. My father bought an Amstrad CPC in 1987, and it was a whole ritual.
You were one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, it was brought from England. He had to go to the airport in Warsaw to meet it, to receive it, and then he got on a train with it and went back home to Toruń. So it was a whole ritual to get a computer back then.
What about actually getting some sort of games? Because simply for the reason that we didn't have the right technology, there wasn't the right kind of development for the games. And when you looked at the States, Atari 8-bit, they were no longer in use. They were here, but we didn't really have the games. So how did we manage to actually get the games onto our market, and how did it all look like?
Oh, but of course, we didn't get legal copies of the games, but piracy was rampant. Only it wasn't piracy, because the Polish copyright didn't have any provisions for software in particular. So copying software was not something that was illegal. And so while it was very difficult to get access to a computer, once you got into the community of computer owners, it was quite easy to get software. And I think this was also something that was very stimulating for the people back then. It's not just a Polish thing, it's generally an Eastern European thing. And I suppose when you look at other countries, even when you look at Western countries, it very often functioned like this. I talked to Bo Jangeborg once, who's a Swedish programmer from the 1980s, the creator of the game Fairlight, and he said that the Swedish gamers community also functions based on piracy very much in the 1980s. But as I said, in Central and Eastern Europe, it was legal to copy software. So you would have these huge, perhaps you either had your friends who supplied you with some software, or you went to, in the bigger cities, you went to these huge computer exchanges. The most famous one was a computer exchange at a primary school at Grzybowska Street in Warsaw. This was a primary school, but of course on weekends it was closed as a school. It was open for business for computer enthusiasts who would bring their own equipment, who would bring their tape recorders, of course, and they would
the gaming folklore.
The game. Oh yeah, I mean this was it's still something of it's a legendary place, right? And when you look at the Polish game industry, most of it actually starts there. Most of the people who later on went to create whatever CD Projekt Red and other major companies, they started going to these exchanges, getting their software from others, distributing what they got from others to others yet. But there was also something very important about these exchanges. They were not just pirate dens. They were, perhaps most importantly, also a place where you could exchange knowledge. programming knowledge, knowledge about the equipment. And I think when you look at it, right now you could use the word piracy, but perhaps it had more to do with the kind of spirit you got, I don't know, in the early days of computing in the Silicon Valley and the area. Places like the Homebrew Computer Club, right? The place in which people who constructed homebrew computers would gather, they would exchange information. From time to time, they would have a spoil sport like Bill Gates coming to tell them that software should be copyrighted and paid for, and they just laughed at him, right? And those were people like, I don't know, Steve Wozniak, for instance, right? So it was a major place. And this early hacker spirit was all about sharing. So you could say that
it was more education. It had an educational purpose, so to speak, as well, because that was the very beginning. So you had to start from somewhere.
Yeah. And there, the basic idea was when you got a great idea, you didn't really guard it and you didn't ask somebody to pay for it. You shared it with everyone so that everyone could benefit. And this was, to a large extent, the spirit of these exchanges. And this is, I think, something that's still very much prevalent. Perhaps not. It doesn't work like this in the Polish game development scene to the full extent. But I think this spirit of community and this spirit of sharing is something that has remained, right? That when there's a competing company, you tend to be friends with them rather than, guard everything from them.
Which I personally admire, because the better the relationship between the two is, the better games we're gonna get in the end, because they share their common experience. I would also like to take a closer look at the concept of soft power in the 80s and the 90s, and the way American industry influenced the budding Polish gaming development industry. What would you say about that? How did America influence Poland in terms of how we were looking at game creation?
I think the most important aspect here would be when you look at the 1980s, the US is a beacon for many people in terms of struggle against the communist government. And the American idea of liberty, including economic liberty, was something that was very strongly present in that time. And when you look at this community of people going to these computer exchanges, sometimes sharing things, but sometimes also selling things, it's like a small island in the communist planned economy that works on completely different principles. In these times, private enterprise and private property were something that was quite limited by the government. And there you had this bunch of people who were much more attracted to this American idea of the self-made man, right?
The revolution,
which was completely incompatible with the regime. And I think this ethos of the self-made man or woman is something that also shaped this early generation of Polish game developers who were self-taught, who had to rely only on themselves because they were at first no regulations to protect them, and then there was. Well, you could say that while there were some state incentives for the film industry, for literature, for theater, this was present all the time in Poland. If you think about the state actually helping game developers, this is the question of the last decade, right? And in Poland, this state support for culture was always a very prominent thing. So this also shows you how separate they would be from the very beginning from this state economy. And I think this was something that was very much a space of personal and economic freedom for people. You don't get overtly political games, or you don't get too many overtly political games in the early Polish game industry. But when you look at the early Czech game industry, you would get games like Indiana Jones and the Wenceslas Square, right? It's about the protests that led to the Velvet Revolution, and the leading figure that could liberate the locals from the communist government was Indiana Jones, right? So you get a great example of that. If you haven't read it, I really recommend. There's a lovely book by Jaroslav Švelch, Gaming the Iron Curtain, which deals with these questions in the Czech game industry. But I think in general, these early game industries were this place where you could be independent, completely independent from the communist government. Yet another little bubble of freedom that you could enjoy in the 1980s.
Some air to breathe.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where do we go from now? Where do we go? Because our gaming development industry has changed dramatically in the last 15 years, especially when it comes to international recognition. What do you think is going to change in the way we make games? And do you think anything is going to change, or we're just going to improve, or we're going to follow certain trends? What is your opinion?
The lovely thing that has been going on in video games for at least the last 10 to 15 years is that you never know what's going to come next.
Exciting.
And I think this is a very exciting time to live in, right? Whenever you make predictions, usually these predictions become outdated 5 years later. So it's a very risky thing you're asking me to do here, because then in 5 years' time somebody will see this video and they'll say, oh, this guy knows nothing. So frankly speaking, I don't know what lies in the future. Definitely something that has happened is that the Polish game industry, and together with it, the other Central and Eastern European game industries, have entered the video game mainstream permanently, right? And it's a lovely process that you could see happening over and over again, with first the British game industry in the 1980s, then the French game industry in the early 1990s, then the German game industry. You had to kind of enter this club led by the American game industry, and you had to be accepted, right? It's lovely when you look at reviews of French games from the 1990s. You always get at least 3 jokes about smelly cheese in game reviews, right? Because it's a French game. When you look at reviews of Central European games in the early 2000s, you'll always get a reference, oh, but this is a post-communist country, so this is why it's so messy, right? Even if you look at the first Witcher, oh, there's lots of bugs, oh, it's such a strange game, oh, because it's Eastern European, right? So it no longer works that way, and I think we are there permanently, and it's not just like it used to be, that it's basically CD Projekt Red and Techland, the major companies that are there, but it's even the smallest Polish companies that function within this system. And as for the closest future, I think it's difficult to predict what will happen, especially after the pandemic, right? We are going to have an economic crisis. Game developers are going through a hard time. Because
everything is postponed as well.
Yeah. Because
so the revenue that was supposed to be in place is not yet, because the games haven't premiered yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's a very difficult time to make predictions. But what I can say definitely is that the problems that the Polish game industry will be facing in the nearest future, they will not be some local problems. Mm-hmm. There'll be the same problems as those faced by the global video game industry.
Well, Pavel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And I'll see you very soon, hopefully.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to talk to Machi Miyonshi from Pixel Crow, indie game development studio, but also one of the veterans, one of the founding fathers of the Polish gaming. Maciej, welcome. It's great to see you.
It's great to be here.
So tell me, because before we spoke to Pavo Schreiber, and we spoke a little bit about the history of how it all started in the 80s in Poland. But you joined in at a very, very particular moment in time. The exchanges were coming to an end. However, you were one of the first game developers. How did it all start? What were the moments that you still recall? What was important? And what's basically the history of it all?
Well, we were young and stupid. That's the easiest explanation because, I was studying computer science at that time, learning to program computers, and of course I started to play games because of those exchanges. So we had an abundant supply of games we could play, and some point because I decided, okay, I want to be a programmer. So what is the best job for the programmer? My idea was to create games because every other programming job is probably, boring and not interesting. So let's make games. That was my idea, but we had no idea how to do this at that time because we couldn't even buy a book and learn from the book.
You have to start somewhere.
Not to mention that, no Google at that time. Internet was at its infancy, so we had some limited access to the email, but that was it. So, but we were very young and very eager to learn. So we decided, okay, let's figure out simply as that by trying, by reverse engineering other games, gathering any information we can, copying books, somebody brought from other countries.
This is real dedication.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, because, you had to learn somehow. Programming was the easiest part because I was a student, so I was taught how to program. But programming games is a completely different matter, and creating the game, because the game is not just the code, it's everything. So we had to learn how to program very specific code related to the games, how to create art, for example. The tools, there were some interesting tools to create graphics, for example, but we couldn't read the data formats. So we had to create our own very primitive tools in order to get the data we can use. Mm-hmm. So we had to build game editors, sprite editors, and everything. And then figure out how to make the game and come up with interesting idea. At some point, we had some jump starts, let's say. We create some prototypes, and not so good, but we learned that way. And then at some point, I was offered the opportunity to create the commercial product because my friend decided, okay, let's make and sell software in Poland, which was a kind of novelty because you could get any software here for the very affordable price for the media basically. But he had the idea, okay, let's make and offer a good service with this. So not only let's make a good software and offer the service the exchanges couldn't offer, like proper customer support and manuals, for example, for the software. And one of those pieces of software was also the idea was let's make a computer game and see how it sells. So we created the first, as we call it, professional Polish PC game because it was done completely professionally. We were paid to do this.
Which one was it?
It was Elektrobody in Poland and later known as Electroman basically everywhere. And we made the game. That was the easiest part. But turning
so
the
effortlessly.
code,
we made a game.
Turning the code into the product you can sell it, that was quite the challenge at that time, especially for the very small startup company. It was, I don't know, 4 people at that moment. everything was difficult. You have to remember that we've just left communism and started to build this free market economy, let's say. So in order to do very specific tasks like creating the box, we had to find someone willing to do this at the price we could afford. Of course, we could go to the former, this printing press, huge conglomerate, and ask for creating the manual or print the manual or create the boxes, but their runs were like, I don't know, 10,000 copies at least. We want to start to very small. So finding someone willing to print the manual at the price we could afford, finding the way to duplicate, for example, floppy disk, because we couldn't afford the proper duplication machine at that time, because the machine was more expensive than all the money we spent making the game. So I'm sorry for
That's
the
perfectly
sounds.
fine. You're in your office.
So bringing the game as a product to the market was probably even bigger challenge than making the game at that time. And this quickly changed into the proper, process. In a year or two, it wasn't a problem anymore. But when we started, we had to make the game and then make the product, and then distribute, because there is no distribution network, no big supermarkets, chains and stuff like that. We had to contact each and every one store, computer store, so-called computer store, and offer them the product they had no idea about, despite the fact that we did some proper marketing at that time, including radio advertisement and press ads and stuff like this. But still, people had no idea what we were offering them at that time. So we had to convince, okay, we have this first professional Polish game that needs to be played, obviously, by everyone. And that way we managed to sell, I don't know, several thousand copies. It was quite successful product at that time. And this proved that if we have we have the offer that really suits the market, people were willing to pay for the Polish game made by Poles for the Polish players.
It's a dream come true, considering the circumstances and considering the limitations when it comes to tools that you were using and the technology that was limited.
We did this first game. We sold the game. The game sold pretty well. We earned some money, which was quite important for us.
It's always nice.
Guys trying to succeed. And then quite quickly, because in a year or so, the game found the foreign publisher. It was Epic Games, and the games was re-released as Electroman worldwide, basically. And that we quickly moved past the Iron Curtain, because we felt that we are from this lesser part of the world, and from that point, almost any game produced in Poland quickly found the market everywhere.
It's an interesting point that you made, that we've moved from behind the Iron Curtain. But I think really what it is in terms of our approach towards the gaming world and our approach towards the West and the culture, I don't really think we ever adapted to the communist idea of the East. Don't you think so?
No. We felt that this game is, Western enough to be played everywhere. So we based the ideas on the Western culture. So we felt that we are a part of the West at that time, but still we were in the East. We had to contact somehow people elsewhere.
How did you contact them?
Using traditional mail, snail mail, that you take the envelope, you put the
No, I get that. But what I'm trying...
the address and simply mail it.
What I was trying to say was, what was the response of the communists, of the still kind of like communist and post-communist government, that there is this field, because there were exchanges before, and now you were stepping into something completely different while you were trying to get away from the stigma that Poland had of being behind the Iron Curtain and being a part of the communist bloc. So I wonder, was there any contact before that time when things were still difficult?
No, it was difficult first for us to find the contacts, the actual address. It wasn't easy to mail something to, I don't know, to EA at that time, because we had no idea where is the address to the EA. We are quite fortunate with the Epic, because Epic was the sharer company, so we had the access to their games, and each game was accompanied by some document where there was the ordering information, and there was the address there. So we simply took this address and used it, and it worked. But in case of contacting anybody else, we had no idea how. On the other hand, some guys from some Eastern country somewhere, with the probably white bears roaming the streets during the winter or something like that, are trying to sell you something. So obviously it required someone open, and brave enough to decide, okay, let's make a deal with those guys, because they are making the game which looks like a game. It's not, the game is not made from wood, for example. This is a proper game. And Epic was quite eager to do that. So when they got the floppy disk, they played the game and say, oh, this is pretty nice game. We want to publish. So let's meet. And okay, let's meet, but this is at that point the US company where we could meet. So let's meet halfway in a way. So we decided to meet in Amsterdam, and we had to take a car and drive all this way to Amsterdam to meet and discuss very basic terms and show that we are real people, not bears.
What an adventure.
Yeah. And then, okay, we agreed that we will work together, and the rest is history, because we cooperated with them. They released many other of our titles. We even published their games in Poland, and were quite successful with that. So it was a pretty good cooperation at that time.
You have many years of experience under your belt. You're one of the founding fathers of the Polish gaming. I'll allow myself to say that. I wonder, what is your recipe to never let corporations get under your creative skin, to keep the freshness, to keep the thirst, the awareness of your own product?
Stay away. That's my recipe, because I decided that big teams and big corporations are not for me. That's why I am now again working at the very small teams. But when you take a look at the Polish corporations, they are not that bad. They are quite innovative anyway. They create pretty good games. So it's not corporation bad, small team good. It's not so easy.
It's a matter of personal preference, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I admire people working there and doing these wonderful things. This is not something for me, and I decided, okay, I had enough. My 5-year stint with the Witcher team was good enough. I learned my lessons, and my idea is to work in very small teams and do what I want. Not what I want, but to have a very direct access to what is being done.
To have hands-on experience, to not just be telling other people what to do.
Yeah, exactly. I need to design stuff. I need to do this stuff by myself, and the responsibility is mine. So if I fail, I cannot blame anyone. I cannot blame other people in my team, because I am the team and maybe a couple of other people. So this is something which is much more interesting for me. But on the other hand, if you would like to create the games that millions of people play and admire, and those games have all bells and whistles and the latest technology, innovation and stuff, you can do this only in those big corporations. That's the only way. And I understand people deciding, okay, I understand the corporation is sometimes not that excellent, but still only there I can do those wonderful things. So it's a matter of choice.
And with this powerful statement, we're ending our little interview today. Maciek, thank you so much for joining me. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure, pure pleasure. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. And so my next guest is Tomasz Gob, game producer at Flying Wild Hog, but also a producer of The Witcher 2. Tomek, welcome. Thank you for joining me. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, starting off, you've worked in a number of big game developing companies. And so I wanted to ask about how does work in such big companies, gaming companies, look like? What is your experience?
It's not a one experience. It's been changing, evolving, revolving as well throughout years. So I've started, that was 2006 when I actually started within the industry. That was CD Projekt Red. That was The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2 that I've worked on. And that was the moment where the company was just, getting up to speed. It was like winding up to be what it is right now. And the whole team worked really, really hard, including myself as well. So that was the, I don't want to say pioneer moment, but that was the moment where we all got our footing even, kind of. And then I've worked at CI Games, then was Techland for a short period of time. Now that's Flying Wild Hog. And these companies that I've mentioned after CD Projekt Red, there was a very important shift. There was a very important kind of paradigm change, because these companies are something different than CD Projekt Red was back then, but CD Projekt Red is different to what it was
Ever
as
evolving.
well, because the whole industry has changed. So that's a very interesting, difference. That's probably what we want to talk about. But I think there's a big and fundamental difference between starting off and being this young, ambitious, aspiring game developer that wants to, do stuff right, because a lot of people don't have a second shot at things, and we work really hard.
You take what you get. You take what you get. You have the chance, you do it.
That's what exactly, and as compared to the other thing, which is actually, knowing what you're worth, knowing what you can do, because you've been there, you've done it, and trying to get, it's a very common phrase right now, like work-life balance, trying to get projects done in a little bit more deterministic manner as compared to, being wild and crazy. So that is the big shift that I've noticed. So things have changed in a very good direction. That's probably also influenced the fact that Polish products, Polish game development is being considered something totally different than it was back in early 2000s.
So what do you think that were the influences that actually were involved in the process of this evolution of the Polish gaming development market?
I always like to say that there's a couple of things, and some of them result from the actual nature of what I think a lot of Polish people are. We like to work hard. I mean, it's not like we like to kill ourselves for getting things done, but like we either, do or die. Pretty much like if we want to do it, we put ourselves in it. And at the same time, we're kind of people who like to manage things. When there's an obstacle, when there's a challenge, we really kind of get motivated by it. And game development industry is like perfect playground for this kind of, characteristics of the people. That's one thing. And the other thing is, we just we just grew and evolved, and Polish game development industry, making games and playing games is something that a lot of kids are drawn into, always have been. And because of the fact that Polish have actually succeeded in it, it turns out that more and more Polish kids want and will want to be game developers. So that's probably one of the factors where it's booming so much in Poland, right?
What is your experience with foreigners working in the game development industry in Poland? Because I'm very interested to find out how do they feel about this market, the way it's developing over time, and is Poland actually an attractive place for them to be working here now?
Yeah, to a lot of them, I'm pretty sure. Right now, working at Flying Wild Hog, the team that I'm working with multiple teams, being the lead producer. But one of the teams that I'm working particularly close with is a game design team. And within that team, I don't know, more than half people are not Polish. So we got Russians, we even got a Brazilian guy. But the
A long
thing
way from
is
home.
that I'll tell that to Gabriel. And the thing is, it's really good for multiple reasons. But all of this evolution that we've touched upon, all of this road, the long road that we've taken and we've gone through, it kind of shines and gives back right now because these people can find themselves working in projects that are being, like big enough to draw and to inspire, that are being led and produced and carried on in a little bit more, or I would say a little bit crazy way than they were 10, 15 years ago. And thanks to that, I think expats and people that are coming to us have a much, much better, clearer, and kind of more comprehensible work environment than it used to be the place. And my experiences are really where I can't think of a single expert person that I've ever had trouble with working. Of course, it means, and it's also big for the rest of the team, like a lot of the Polish in the team, like it immediately boosts their English, which is great as well.
Another question that I have for you is when you reach a certain goal as a company, as many gaming companies in Poland, they reach a certain goal, they reach success. How do you, when you're successful, maintain high standards of work, but also high standards of creativity so you don't burn out?
Well, that's kind of the same. I mean, because for creative people, standard of work is being creative. Probably we all know the phrase, stay hungry, stay foolish. I always like that one. I think that's Steve Jobs, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the things you need to do is to stay who you are. And that's the really worn out phrase. But what I'm talking about is like, it's probably possible that a lot of people will work really hard for the first period of their work in a game development. And it's the same for the studios. And that's why I'm trying to tie these both together. And at the same time, when you've done something, when you've accomplished, when you've reached the pinnacle, when you've reached the top that you wanted to climb, then you look around and you see what's next. And it's always important to see why you were there in the first place. So you don't you think whether there's something you can do better. And that means that Polish companies have, and they do, and they probably will be, fingers crossed, and they will be keeping their work re-evaluated once they do something. And that means also reaching that pinnacle, like, okay, so we've done that. Now let's try to repeat that, being better for our team, being better leaders, being, better work environment, rewarding them better, maybe better pays as well. That's also
super
very important.
important.
But also,
a happy team is a, fulfilled team.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people reaching the goal, but then there was nothing else for them. And you can keep the people. Like at first, it's reaching that, but then it's keeping the team together, keeping the company, keeping the vision, keeping the the road forward. It's as much important. But that shift, once you're at the pinnacle, from that turns to that. So you look broader. You look at the team. I think that's something that's really important and underestimated in a couple situations, and that probably didn't pay off well.
There's always field to improve. I also wanted to ask about The Witcher 2, obviously. I wanted to ask about your experiences, and did you actually, would you predict that it would become such a powerful franchise in terms of games that are being produced on the Polish market?
Yeah.
That was
if
a long
you stay
sigh.
foolish, you don't. But if you stay hungry, you do. I've always looked at CD Projekt as a company that knows their stuff in terms of they wanted to be pioneers. They wanted to do something that nobody's ever done. And once they've reached that point, they probably still think how they can stay there. So when I worked at The Witcher 1, then was The Witcher 2, I've seen certain changes in the approach of the company. some things don't change, but a lot of people have changed. And then there was The Witcher 3. I was not part of that, of CD Projekt Red at that point. But when my friends asked me, what do you think? And they're doing this Witcher 3, there's so much hype for it. And yeah, I mean, if it comes for hype, if it comes for big projects, big budgets, big productions, they know what they're doing. It's going to be all they say and then some. And it was, so it might be a personal question. I mean, some people maybe had not predicted it, but I kind of saw that coming. I saw that coming, and it's great for them. I wish them all the best.
We all wish you all the best. Tomek, thank you so much for your invaluable insight. Thanks for joining me today, finding time.
Thank you very much.
And so my next guest is Jakub Marszałkowski from Poznań University of Technology, the organizer of the Game Industry Conference, an event which I really do believe you shouldn't miss if you want to keep up to speed with the gaming world. Jakub, thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
So what would you say Polish game developers specialize in?
We should start with the fact that our industry is really big. Right now, it's one of the biggest in Europe. Our latest research shows that in 2020, it's nearly 10,000 people working on game production in Poland, over 440 studios producing games. It's really big industry, diverse, with plenty of different approaches to game dev, to game production, to game market. We have a big share of companies producing AAA titles right now. I would say it would be like 6 or 7 studios going that way currently, and we will see those titles this year, next year, and in the near future. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have small teams down to single developer being able to produce successful indie games, something new, something fresh, something that stays in players' minds.
So we're basically talking Polish game industry domestically, but what is the view of the Polish game developers outside internationally?
I think we are more and more recognized for quality of games. The work we are doing at Indie Games Poland is putting good pressure on that. We've been on many trade shows with Polish games, and we see more and more tractions, more and more players coming back with something like, I've seen you last year, you had great games, what great games you have this year. I think slowly there is this understanding that Polish games mean quality, which is really nice for us.
Would you say that Poland is providing not only a good gaming background, a good gaming industry, but also an opportunity and place to host events that directly relate to the gaming world?
Yeah, we have awesome events, both in a huge scale, like Poznań Game Arena, like SIGA Awards being the best games awards for the whole Central and Eastern Europe. But we also have great events on the scale of small cities, of the scale of universities. I would say it's like 40 game jams every year happening in Poland, where people can get more experience, where people can join teams and do games together. We have a really lively community working together, sharing experience. We see also that Poland is more and more interesting for people from abroad to come and to work. Like the biggest companies have a growing share of international employees. But also, I would say something like every year, 1 or 2 studios comes from abroad, relocating whole team to Poland to look for their opportunity here, to look for increase of the team size here, and everything Poland can offer. Yeah, it's very good place for growth of your game dev business.
That's wonderful news. I would also like to take a closer look at the comparison of big gaming companies and the small developing companies. Do you think the growth can be simultaneous, or is it the case that the bigger companies might be overtaking the market space a bit more in terms of development?
We see that the growth is happening on both ends. And the biggest companies are growing really, really fast. like CD Projekt Red with 1,100 people right now. It's crazy big. But on the other end, I remember studios that were 5 people some time ago and now are 40 people. So it's the process. You develop your first game, then you double your team size, then you develop another game, and bang, you're 40. Yeah, it's happening on both ends. Obviously, there are some cases where someone did not survive because market is difficult, because everything is changing. But in general, we see growth in all the factors.
How do you think Polish gaming industry is going to be affected by the coronavirus pandemic?
I think the development part is not suffering from the pandemic. We are developing quite well. Companies switch to home office in most cases, and yeah, it has its troubles, but it's working. What might be more difficult is promotion, access to markets. Like we would love to be at PAX in person, but it's not possible. We would love to show the games to the gamers on the booth with hands-on, with experiencing what's the quality of the game. But we only can do what we can do. So this might be a challenge this year and maybe also the next one.
Jakub, thank you for joining me. It was wonderful to have you here. I hope to see you soon during our Poznan Gaming Arena.
Let's hope that it will be possible.
Fingers crossed. Thanks so much once again.